All right, so last week you had a chance to implement chunk 2 of the reading strategy. So let's talk through how it went, what you did, and what the student work is showing us.
Well, I think that this chunk 2 actually went better than like the first time I tried chunk 2, so that's a positive. I gave the kids a little bit of a scaffold of the 5 W's, and the text itself, I think it was shorter, but it also was to help bridge the gaps between 2 units. So I think it was kind of nice because they were able to reference some prior knowledge to kind of use in their 5 W's. But then it also had some starting platforms into a discussion that we're going to have that day. So I really liked how this was a nice transition and a really great way to kind of start class. I've noticed all of my kids, all my samples are still able to do chunk 1, which is underlining the keyword, and then going into the passage to underline it as well. The true problem started to come in through chunk 2. So I did one word with them. I did the word melanin. And so we were kind of talking through, who has melanin and kind of reading through some of the passage where melanin was found. Luckily, the nice thing about the passage is it's used twice within the same paragraph, so there's a lot of things the students could reference.
Okay.
And so we talked through like who produces melanin. Well, it says melanocytes that produce melanin. Okay, what is it? It says, melanin is part of our skin color, so we wrote color of skin. I was trying to keep really short answers so they weren't rewriting everything, and I think that's where some kids kind of struggle too, is they want to go through the whole thing and they don't really pull out some of those key things or how to summarize, if that makes sense, kind of shorten it up themselves. And so from there, I asked a question of what type of word is it, and that was somewhat helpful because some of the distractors were dealing with a verb, and the word is a noun.
Okay.
So I really tried to highlight some of that parts of speech, stuff they're doing in their English class, and how that can help us with science literature. And so they were able to kind of go through and identify the correct answer. Now, some of them got it wrong. However, when we did the we do for that, and I kind of explained how I pulled the definition out using my 5 W's, it made more sense to them. And I heard a lot of, okay.
Okay.
So that was nice. But the second word I had them do as a you do, and that's where I started to see a lot of discrepancies. I started to see like a couple kids struggled with like when do we have metathesis? It was a different word. When does this happen? There was more writing, more copying of like what was happening in the text, not a lot of shortened answers. So, it was kind of interesting to see how much students were writing of around the word, and if you actually kind of put it all together, it's almost like the whole sentence again.
Okay.
And so it's interesting that way. And so I kind of wonder, how can I best model shorter, more refined parts of the 5 W's? What sort of specific questions I should be asking? Because some kids were struggling with the when, some kids were just rewriting the why as the same as the other word because the whole topic's about skin cancer.
Sure.
And then the metacognitive piece, I think I only had one student really say the 5 W's helped me.
Okay.
Rereading the passage and trying to find stuff to match the 5 W's. I think I had like 2 kids really say that.
Okay.
Most of them referenced chunk 1, or a couple of my lower level ones just said narrowed down choices. And which is what we kind of want them to get away from. That's one aspect of answering questions. But so that's kind of where my struggle is. So I would say most of these students are falling into the emerging struggling because I think they understand the purpose of the 5 W's and kind of the idea behind it, but they're not implementing it well enough to help them create their own definition.
Sure.
And I think that's where my struggle is.
Sure. That makes sense. And this was your first implementation of chunk 2?
This is my second implementation of Chunk 2. My first one didn't go over very well. I did an I do and then I did a we do, but I didn't have this part. I had them write the 5 W's on like a sheet of paper or at the bottom of the text. And it was really sloppy. The kids, I think, were a little bit more disorganized. For the we do, I tried to pull out some from the kids, what they were looking at, and then it got a little bit confusing because some of the kids gave out some answers that they pulled out that wasn't that relevant. So it was a little bit harder. So I thought maybe doing this to make it more, at least getting that organizational piece was helpful, and it did. It was more organized. For me personally, it was better to see. And as I walked around, it was a lot easier for me to see where they were at.
Sure.
Because kids were writing the 5 W's in different ways too, you know, like who, when, where, why, you know?
Sure.
And so it was easier for me to help give a little bit more feedback during my field test. So.
Excellent. Great.
So I think I'm going to continue with that for right now. But I think I need to really think about the questions that they should be asking.
Sure. Well, I want to point out the successes too. We're seeing kids still applying Chunk 1 independently. That's a big success and really speaks to how well you modeled and scaffolded them through Chunk 1. So that's a thing to celebrate. And just figuring out that the graphic organizer here really helps them, and choosing a short, appropriate text that is content related but also supporting their literacy. So lots of really good stuff happening, and 2 implementations. We're noticing through the other field testing that we need several implementations. So even though they're not yet all on track, we're getting there. So these are all really good things. Wondering if during your model, did you have a visual of the questions that you asked yourself during the Think Aloud?
I did not have a visual of the questions I asked myself. I had reading displayed, and so I could move it down so I could show the who, what, when, where, why, but I didn't write like who is blank.
Okay.
Or who is the author intending for this reading?
Sure.
So it was more orally done, and kind of maybe off the, as I was doing it as I was going. So I think that maybe was a struggle, maybe if I had some specific.
Because one thing we noticed in Chunk 1 was having that visual of the steps was used by a lot of kids during the U-Do. So I wonder if that same idea of having a visual that students could reference during the U-Do might be helpful, because we're really seeing that they're struggling with pulling out some of those relevant details. So having something to go back to help prompt their thinking when they're doing this on their own might be really helpful.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think it would help my model as well. So I think that, that's a good way to try it out. So would you suggest that I put it on like just on the board, or would you suggest I do it like within a PowerPoint, or how would you just suggest I display it then?
In my own field testing, reflecting on that, I had the whiteboard dedicated to the passage and the 5 W's. So I used a piece of paper just like this that I put up in the room, and then when I was asking myself those questions during the model, I would point to those. And then before the U-Do, I would remind them that those questions are available to them to be thinking about when they're working independently.
Okay. Could you do an example? Like, who is this word about? Like, would they just, like, if the word is melanin, do you find students just write the word, the who is the same word that they're trying to find? Or how do you kind of...
That's a great question, and I think that's something we still need to kind of flesh out through field testing. But if a student is struggling to find, let's say, a who and a when, they're still coming up with maybe 3 other clues.
Sure.
So they're still coming up with some clues, maybe not all 5, or maybe not all 5 in those categories, but they're still coming up with some clues that are ultimately going to help them with Chunk 3 in being able to come up with a definition. So I think that I would consider, when there's not an obvious who, for example, having them determine maybe that's not even necessary.
Okay.
at this point.
Sure.
Maybe we move on to what? And
Okay, so
put
that
that
as
there.
we keep going, maybe we can develop who is this for, kind of who's
Absolutely.
doing this in the cell, or something like that. Okay, so kind of what pops out, maybe that would be that might be interesting to think about for what are students going to first.
Yeah.
And maybe that might be something we should reorganize. Maybe.
Because we do want this to be somewhat fluid
Yeah.
as well. And so that would be my suggestion for field testing.
Mhm.
And we can look at the data at the next implementation to see if that's supporting students or not.
Yeah, I do think our kids are very like sequenced, and so I think if they get hung up on one of them, they really stay on it until they just say, okay, I'm going to move on. So maybe kind of discussing that too when I'm setting the purpose might be beneficial. Okay.
I think that's a great idea. We get so much information from this metacognitive question. What reading strategy did you use that helped you? That really helps us to read between the lines
Right.
here to find out what are they thinking during the independent work. And as you do more implementations, we'll probably find that that's more specific
Mhm.
and more focused on the particular chunk that we're focused on.
Yeah. Yeah, because some of these, the higher, the on track or emerging ones, some of the ones that are really emerging are referencing this strategy. So the top 3 here are my lowest ones, and they had the most difficulty during the field test. So, and they obviously left it blank. So really targeting those kids might be a benefit, maybe pairing them up during the
Absolutely.
redo, maybe shuffle them up a little bit. So, okay. All right, so I guess my next steps would be, based off of what we talked about, making sure I have a display, maybe tailoring it a little bit for science, like
Sure.
what's happening in the body, or
Sure.
where is this happening in the cell, okay?
Absolutely.
And then really focusing on trying to get kids to process and write down what they're thinking and doing, so we can get some info, and maybe that helps push them along into the next strategy section. Okay.
That sounds like a great plan. So let me know when you're implementing.
Sure.
I would love to come and script and take note of what the students are doing, and then we can follow up looking at the student work samples again.
Awesome. Yeah, I think probably sometime next week, maybe the end of the week. We're starting a brand new unit, new semester, so should be relatively quick since it's a lot of new stuff. So.
Awesome. Great.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Nick.